numerous people have raised a frightening scenario that artificial intelligence will develop goals, one of two scenarios. Either we'll tell it to do something and it will pursue it so doggedly that it will harvest my kidneys to make more paper clips, or it will suddenly develop desires that I didn't put into it because it will, like all intelligence, it will have other things that crosses its mind, is the claim, and that will include domination, and it will get me out of the picture. It'll be the equivalent, as Eric Hole pointed out, of Neanderthal man inviting Homo sapien into the campfire and saying, "Hey, you're smarter than us. Can you help us learn some things we don't know already?" And instead, they go extinct. Why are you unconvinced by those fears?
Yeah, so I think there's two kind of recurrent patterns in how people think about these things, and let's introduce two large words to talk about it. So one is anthropomorphizing. Right. And so there's this like long seated kind of tendency on the part of human beings to sort of impute human behavior into things that are actually not human. And of course, this is a long tradition, and in many mythologies and in many religions. And it's one of these things where it's seemingly irrational, but of course, it probably makes some evolutionary sense because you want to not take the chance, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And it's fun to be afraid if it doesn't actually get you.
Yeah, well, horror movies, right? Like, you want to, if you hypothesize the terrible scenario, maybe you can avoid it, and then, or at least come to terms with it. And then the other concept is what's called millenarianism, which is basically the tendency to form apocalyptic cults, apocalyptic religions. And there's a sort of a long tradition in sort of Christian and Christian derived cultures. There's a long tradition of millenarian apocalypse cults. Many of which became very famous because they either killed a lot of people or they all committed suicide. And so you've had everything from the People's Temple to the Manson cult to Heaven's Gate and many others. And of course, California in particular, we are very famous for our cults. We have many thousands of cults at any point in time. And most of them end fine. People just go off in the woods or whatever and do whatever they do. Every once in a while, they end in madness and death. And the concern with the cult always is that they are going to tilt, full on apocalyptic and actually take their own, predictions seriously and actually act on them. And so I think what you have is you have a generation of, it goes back to your point on IQ, you have a generation of extremely smart people who have kind of thought themselves into an apocalypse cult. And it's an apocalypse cult that anthropomorphizes. And so it reads into machines things that aren't there. And then it sort of applies from that, therefore the end of the world. And I think, and we could go through this in detail, but I think like all the claims that you just described, like I think they all kind of have this characteristic, which is like, okay, we have this relatively pedestrian starting point in terms of what technology can do. We are not going to hypothesize a series of kind of abstracted breakthroughs that are going to result in quite literally, right, self-aware machines ultimately deciding to kill humanity. I think these are fundamentally religious claims. I think that, generally in life, making up your own religion is a bad idea. Generally in life, becoming a member of an apocalypse cult is a bad idea. By the way, I would not criticize them in this way if they were not tripping the line into advocating for actual real world violence, which is what's actually now happening, which is, people like the ones that you mentioned are now advocating for real world violence up to and including things like airstrikes on data centers, and even potentially nuclear war, to offset the risk of a runaway AI in another country. And I think at the point where people are calling for that level of real world violence, we have to actually call it what it is, which is an irrational apocalypse cult.